All right, I'm no big conspiracy theorist here or anything, but week 9 has me a little bit freaked out. The Miami Dolphins won a football game. Both running backs of the Houston Texans finished within the top 12. And then you had the likes of Ronald Jones and J.D. McKissick outscoring Zeke Elliott, Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, Leonard Fournette, and Chris Carson, just to name a few. Oh, man, this is some of that next level shit. What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully you guys are all doing well out there. Welcome to Week 10 Fantasy Football. And today we're talking about the running back position. It was a crazy Week 9, but we're going to dive into all of the Week 10 matchups here in just one second. Just a reminder, though, don't get hung up on what column I have them in, the start or the sit column. It really depends on what your situation is for your roster. Maybe you're dealing with injuries or have a lot of bye weeks. This is like bipocalypse for a lot of people. We have the Denver Broncos, Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars, New England Patriots, Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Redskins. All these teams are on a bye this week, so more than likely, you have a couple players on your roster that may not be playing this week. Don't get hung up on those starts and sits. Pay attention to the information that's given behind these names, and hopefully that is enough to help you make your decisions to help you win fantasy football matchups. That's what it's all about. Don't get hung up on the column, though. A lot of people say, oh, you said to sit this guy. Well, did you listen to the reasons why? If that doesn't apply to you, then don't listen to that part of it. It all depends on your situation. So take that for what it's worth here going into Week 10. But before we get into those matchups, let's see how we did in Week 9. All right, for Week 9 for the running back position, a pretty decent week. We had 44 players that we gave a start or sit designation to that actually finished their games here this week. Out of those 44 players, 29 of them were correct for an accuracy percentage of 66%. Some of our biggest hits, Melvin Gordon. Last week I said, hey, listen, the guy's going to start touching the ball more with Anthony Lynn calling the plays. He had a great game, kind of a 2019 breakout game, I guess you could say, for Melvin Gordon. Devin Singletary. A lot of people said, man, why are you sitting Frank Gore? Why do you like Devin Singletary? You kind of saw it last week. Now, yes, his opponent was not the strongest. However, the touches were there, and that's what we're looking for going forward. Mark Ingram we had as a start last week. Despite the tough matchup with the New England Patriots, we saw what Baltimore did to New England there the other night. Adrian Peterson, not ever going to be flashy, but with these bye weeks and these injuries, is still providing solid fantasy production on a weekly basis. Some of the biggest misses, Kenyon Drake, did not see that happening against the San Francisco 49ers on a short week with a new team. Very, very impressive. We'll have to see what he does going forward. David Montgomery, I did not like his matchup going into the week against the Philadelphia Eagles, and you kind of saw why. He didn't put up huge yardage numbers. He got bailed out with a couple goal line carries, though, and that's what made him a miss for us this week. Damian Williams was really just one big play, that made him a miss for the week. He had a 90-plus yard run there that really gave him a solid fantasy day, but had it not been for that one play, dude is a hit for the week. Carlos Hyde had himself a career day with like 160 yards rushing. Another thing that we missed there in Week 9. But hey, now Week 10 is here. The playoff push is upon us. We really need to get some victories here the last couple weeks of the season to propel ourselves into the fantasy playoffs. So let's dive into Week 10 and see what we have here coming up. All right, first matchup here for the week. It's going to be the Los Angeles Chargers and Oakland Raiders. Now, the Anthony Lynn rushing attack is back for the Los Angeles Chargers, and that led them to a win back in Week 9. 32 rush attempts combined for both Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler, and that's kind of what we can see going forward. Don't forget, in last week's show, I said that when Anthony Lynn called the plays in the past for the Buffalo Bills, his offense was ranked number 1 and 2 in both rush attempts and rushing yards. They're going to run the ball, and you saw that start to happen last week with Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler. It led to a huge victory for the Chargers, and I expect them to continue that moving forward. Now, Oakland only allows 18.2 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but Gordon has 4 touchdowns now in his last 3 games, and he's slowly starting to return back to his 2018 form. Don't forget, he had that long layoff where he was not playing. It's going to take him a few weeks to get back and acclimated not only to the game plan, but to the speed of the game. Now, it's finally starting to pick back up. One of his first games here of the season where he had over 4 yards a carry. He's going to have a strong second half of the season. Love Melvin Gordon. Now, Oakland allowed just over 100 yards last week, and that was to the likes of Ty Johnson and J.D. McKissick of the Detroit Lions. I like my chances a lot better going forward with Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon. Eckler Kind of one of these guys who's a little bit more PPR dependent, but he's not overly involved in the passing game. He does have that upside on a weekly basis. More of a flex play option going forward. We saw Melvin Gordon get close to 20 touches on the ground this week, and that's what we need to see going forward. Who takes that hit? It's Austin Ekeler. Still flex worthy, though, with all these injuries and buys that we're dealing with. So now, on the Oakland side of the football, we have Josh Jacobs, who had a huge week 9 last week. 28 carries, 120 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. He's continuing to get that huge volume. 3 out of the last 4 games that he's played in, he's had 20-plus carries in those games. And right now, the Chargers give up, on average, 20.6 fantasy points per game, 8th most in the NFL to opposing running backs. The kid is very impressive, 100%. But right now, he already has 163 touches on the season. The most he ever saw in college was 140. So he's already passed that total here, and we're heading into week 10. I know he's been banged up at times. Can he make it the entire season? If he does, the guy is a surefire stud running back. Right now, a great matchup. Going to start Josh Jacobs once again here in week 10. Ravens and Bengals up next, and Mark Ingram fresh off his great game against that tough run D of the New England Patriots, where he put up 144 total yards in week 9. And now he gets the defense of the Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, sign me up for that. Right now, the Bengals giving up on average 25.6 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's second most in the NFL. Right now, the Ravens, they're going to be playing with confidence, coming off of that big win, ending the perfect season so far of the New England Patriots. They're a very confident football team, and when they're confident, they play really well. Now, Lamar Jackson may limit the ceiling somewhat of Mark Ingram. He kind of takes away a few of those touchdown runs. Some of those huge games aren't really going to be there consistently for Mark Ingram because of the rushing upside of Lamar Jackson. However, it is a very, very safe floor for Mark Ingram. He's a solid, rock-solid running back too almost every single week. This week, in a great matchup, has that low-end RB1 upside though, so I do love Mark Ingram here once again. Now, Joe Mixon. This guy, it's really hard to peg where to put him. The talent is there, 100%. The opportunity is somewhat there, and he had a good game before the bye week where he had 77 total yards and a touchdown, but now a rookie quarterback under center in Ryan Finley, a horrible offensive line, and Gio Bernard, who's still somewhat involved on passing downs. Baltimore does allow 18.3 fantasy points per game, but those numbers are somewhat skewed because of a few big games that they gave up earlier in the season, to Nick Chubb being one of them. They just played this Cincinnati Bengals team back in week 6. They limited Joe Mixon to 39 total yards in that game. The Baltimore run defense is improved, and they've been playing better here the past few weeks. I can't just trust Joe Mixon to put him in my lineup. In my opinion, he is a bye week or an injury replacement at best on a weekly basis. This team is just not that good, and he's not going to get the opportunity enough to really give you that safe floor. Yes, he could have big games, but they're going to be big play and touchdown dependent. If you have no better options, you roll the dice. If there's somebody else on your bench who has that safe floor, I'm going with them before I go with Joe Mixon. Bills and Browns up next, and hopefully I redeemed myself here a little bit. 2 weeks ago I missed the breakout game of David Montgomery, so last week had Devin Singletary as a start and had his best game here so far of the season. 140 total yards and a touchdown. So hopefully I helped redeem that a little bit. Hopefully a few of you guys had him in your lineups. Now, Gore was pretty much non-existent. Barely averaged 1 yard per carry against the Washington Redskins. And now in this game where Devin Singletary saw 20 carries, is that kind of the passing of the torch here? Now, we knew that this kid had tons of talent. He needed more opportunity. He needed more carries out of the backfield. Now that he's 100% healthy, this is something that we could see going forward. And the mess that is the Cleveland Browns right now give up on average 20.5 fantasy points per game. And last week with Phillip Lindsay, they allowed over 10 yards per carry. Already so far in this season, Cleveland has allowed 4 running backs to score at least 22 fantasy points in a game so far this season. The upside is huge this week for Devin Singletary. I don't want to overhype the kid, but going forward, this guy could have some real fantasy value, and more than likely, based off of your rosters and where you've had him, you may have picked him up off the waiver wire while he was injured even. If that's the case, he's your flex option, and that is a great flex option here heading in to week 10. Now for Nick Chubb, he's had a couple down weeks, but it's not entirely his fault. 5 out of the last 6 games, he's seen 20 plus carries in each game. So we know the volume is going to be there. The offensive line hasn't been great, and don't get me started on the passing game of the Cleveland Browns. They're not doing him any favors to pull those defenders outside of the box. Right now, Buffalo allowing 20.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and I'm still going to be starting Nick Chubb. A lot of people want to know, though, what about Kareem Hunt? Well, they say he's going to have a role, and he's going to be a part of this offense. And to a certain extent, I kind of believe that. But this is this guy's first game in just about a year to the date. I'm not quick to just throw him in my lineup. Now, if the Cleveland Browns offense was clicking on all cylinders and they were putting up huge points and huge number of yardage on a weekly basis, then maybe I gamble and throw him at a flex spot. But being that this offense is already struggling, let's see how they use Kareem Hunt first before we throw him into our lineup. I'm going to sit Kareem Hunt this week with Frank Gore as a sit also, starting Devin Singletary and Nick Chubb. Lions and Bears up next, and apparently Matt Nagy's not a complete idiot in this offense. He's finally starting to give David Johnson consistent touches. Now, I did not like the matchup last week for David Montgomery going up against that run defense of the Philadelphia Eagles. And on paper, he didn't do great yardage-wise, only had a total combined 76 total yards. However, what gave him the solid fantasy day was the 2 goal line touchdowns. Now, if that's something that they can add there, have that upside on a weekly basis, it makes him a little bit safer. But you got to be careful. You don't want to chase touchdowns. You want to chase volume. The volume then turns into those touchdown opportunities. So if we're banking on just touchdowns, it has me worried. However, now over the past 2 weeks that he's seen some of this volume, going forward, it makes him slightly safer. Plus, the matchup does not hurt. This week, the Lions give up on average 26.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That is the most in the NFL. So far this season, the Lions have allowed 7 running backs to score at least 20 fantasy points in a game. Love the matchup there for David Montgomery. Hopefully the volume continues because he could turn into somebody here down the stretch that has solid weekly either flex or running back 2 upside depending on your roster with injuries and bye weeks. Now, for Detroit, it's not a horrible matchup. I mean, the Bears give up on average just over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but Ty Johnson and J.D. McKissic, neither one of these guys am I overly excited to throw into my lineup. Maybe you're in a deeper league. If I had to choose one of these guys, it would be J.D. McKissic for his PPR upside. He's a little bit more involved in the passing game than Ty Johnson, but neither one of these guys is a safe play. They're both risky. If I have the chance, I'm leaving them both on the bench. Giants and Jets up next, and Saquon Barkley is an obvious start, right? I mean, even his worst game of the season still netted you 13 fantasy points in a half-point PPR format. And now he gets the defense of the New York Jets, are giving up on average just over 18 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Plus, the Jets are somewhat in shambles, right? I mean, they lost to the Dolphins. I mean, what the heck is going on there with the Jets? And now Le'Veon Bell having an MRI on his knee. What is the extent, if any, of that injury? Don't forget, just a few weeks ago, Le'Veon Bell had an MRI, and a lot of people started freaking out and said, man, this guy's going to miss a lot of time. Ended up coming out there and being just fine. I mean, last week, week 9, Le'Veon Bell saw the most touches in a game since week 2. And right now, the Giants allow 18.4 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But how does this injury change things? It's something we need to pay attention to. A lot of people saw the signing of Josh Adams and assumed that that meant that there was something wrong with Le'Veon Bell. Don't make that assumption too soon. Let's wait. Let's see how the rest of the week goes before we make any of those decisions. Right now, Ty Montgomery, Bilal Powell would be next in line for touches. Neither one of them who I'm overly excited just to throw right into my lineup. But it's something just to pay attention to. I do think that Le'Veon Bell plays this week, and if he does, he should still see decent volume. Watch those practice reports. Watch the injury reports. This could have been, something that's just blown out of proportion that a lot of people made into a big story that really wasn't anything. Chiefs and Titans up next, and the obvious start here is going to be Derrick Henry. I mean, the volume is there on a weekly basis. The touchdown upside is there, and now a great matchup going up against the Chiefs, who give up on average just under 25 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. The stars are aligned for Derrick Henry to have another solid week. However, at this point, for the Kansas City Chiefs, it is a total crapshoot of what to do in this backfield. I mean, it kind of seems like Damian Williams may be the leader in this backfield as of right now, but things can change at a moment's notice. I mean, no Kansas City running back has had more than 13 carries in a game since week 1. There's no consistent passing game between any of these guys. They're big play dependent, and it's somewhat of a tough matchup here going up against the Tennessee Titans. No running back has had more than 74 yards on the ground against the Tennessee Titans here on the season. Now, that big run really saved Damian Williams' day back in week 9. He's more of a bye-week fill-in. However, momentum is somewhat shifting towards Damian Williams. If he can keep that momentum going forward and they can get Patrick Mahomes back, you could see a slight spark, maybe a slight uptick in volume going towards the way of Damian Williams, kind of similar to what we saw end of last season. However, don't get overly excited. Let's see it happen first. A flex play at best, depending on injuries and bye weeks. However, the upside for Damian Williams here end of the season could be on the rise. Arizona, Tampa Bay up next, and is this the week that David Johnson returns? Possibly. But what does that mean for the likes of Kenyon Drake, who just shredded the San Francisco 49ers defense last week? I mean, they would both be involved. I don't have a question about that in this offense, but is there enough for both of them to go around to really have solid fantasy days? I mean, right now, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers only give up, on average, 11.9 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. I mean, maybe they ride Kenyon Drake another week, try to give David Johnson that opportunity to get back to full health. Why risk further injury? They're not really in the playoff hunt right now. Get Drake in there, get him all the touches, let DJ get back to be 100%. However, what are we going to do here this week? What if David Johnson plays? Can you really sit either one of these guys? Yeah, the team is not that good, but they're improved over last year, and they're heavily involved in the game plan. If they both play, it kind of makes them flex plays at best with limited ceilings because we just don't know which one of them is going to see the bulk of the touches. We're assuming that it's Kenyon Drake this week. Pay attention to those practice reports, to those injury reports, though, and let's see what happens moving forward. Best case scenario, unless you're a David Johnson owner, is that David Johnson sits, and then going into the game, we know that Drake is going to get the bulk of the volume and makes him a little bit safer of a start. Still probably a flex play, but then has that RB2 upside here going into the weekend against a very difficult run defense. But for Tampa Bay, can we still hashtag say no to Rojo? I mean, there's a lot of talk going around that he's going to be the starter here going forward. But Arizona isn't horrible against opposing running backs. They've only allowed 4 rushing touchdowns so far on the season. Now, Ronald Jones may start, but he's not overly involved in the passing game. And Dare Olawale, or whatever you want to call him, is stealing touchdowns. That really limits the upside and makes him a little bit more big play dependent in this game, does it Ronald Jones? Now, I understand the want to throw him into your lineup. And this is where it kind of comes into what we talked about at the beginning of the show. If you have no better options due to injuries or bye weeks, then yes, you take the risk and you start Ronald Jones. However, if you have better options, I'm looking at those other options. I'm not quick just to trust Ronald Jones because Bruce Arians came out and said he's going to start. All that means is that he's going to be out there for the first series of the game. That does not guarantee him 15, 20 touches a week. That's not how things work. He'll start the game, doesn't mean he'll finish it. And until we can see a little bit more consistency out of him from a week-to-week basis, he's not somebody who I'm looking forward to starting. Like I said, bye-week fill-in, injury replacement at best here for me in Week 10. Falcons and Saints now, and is this the week that Alvin Kamara returns? If it is, it would be great timing because now they're facing the Atlanta Falcons, who give up over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. He's coming off the bye week. He should be well rested if he's 100% healthy. With Drew Brees back under center, we still have that high ceiling for Alvin Kamara going forward. However, it's another one of these things where we just need to pay attention to how limited he is throughout the week. If all week, or at least the whole second half of the week, he's getting in full practice sessions, more than likely we are not going to see too much Latavius Murray. If he's limited at all throughout the week, Latavius Murray kind of becomes a little bit more of a flex option, and obviously if Kamara does not play, Latavius Murray becomes a must-start in this matchup. Just something else that we need to pay attention to here going forward in Week 10. For the Falcons, I'll still start Devontae Freeman. It's a tough matchup, though. Right now, the Saints are the second best defense against opposing running backs, giving up only 10.9 fantasy points per game. but the involvement in the passing game for Devonta Freeman gives him that safer floor. He's had double-digit fantasy points in 5 out of his last 6 games. He's healthy. He's a solid running back too. Don't forget, we mentioned this before. A lot of people see Devonta Freeman in their lineup, and they expect stud RB1 numbers. You didn't draft him as an RB1. You drafted him as an RB2, and even if he gets what only the Saints allow on average, 10.9 fantasy points, at the end of the day, if Devonta Freeman has 11 fantasy points, you're not hating life in a matchup like this with this many bye weeks. I don't mind Devonta Freeman here in Week 10. Dolphins and Colts up next, and no more Mark Walton. Oh well, I mean, does anybody really care? I mean, I guess you can say it's finally time for Kalen Ballage. Yes, that Kalen Ballage, who's averaging like 2 yards a carry. Does anybody really care? Going up against an Indianapolis Colts defense, which is 8th best against opposing running backs. You can add him if you want to. Unless you're in a 14-team league or larger, though, I'm really not considering starting him. Not only is it a tough matchup, but the guy hasn't really done anything to show me that he has that upside, that potential upside. In my opinion, he is 100% goal line touchdown dependent. Not just getting into the red zone, not any involvement in the pass game. The dude has got to be on the goal line, and if that's the case, that's just too much risk. I'm not willing to take it here in Week 10. For Marlon Mack, though, this is a guy who really hasn't had a big game lately. A lot of people are hoping to get more out of him, but the volume is still there. So far on the season, he's averaging just under 20 carries a game at 19.8 carries per game. Miami, they allow 24.1 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. Does Jacoby Brissett play this week? There's a chance that he does. However, if he misses, maybe they rely a little bit more on Marlon Mack in the running game to take the pressure off the quarterback there in Indianapolis. I still love Marlon Mack, and he's definitely going to be somebody who I look forward to starting here in Week 10. Rams and Steelers up now, and if the Rams are going to make a run at the postseason, they have to start now, and they have to start quickly. I mean, they're coming off of a bye week. They're relatively healthy with the exception of maybe Brandon Cooks, but they need to start relying on their studs to carry them to the postseason. Todd Gurley has 7 touchdowns in 7 games played, but this is a tough road game for him right now. The Steelers only allow 15.2 fantasy points per game, but with San Francisco and Seattle already out to a division lead there in the NFC West, the Rams don't have a choice. They have to make a run at it. Maybe, possibly, they rested Gurley first half of the season, didn't give him that huge volume to make sure he was fresh down the stretch. Could we be looking at a huge second half for Todd Gurley? It's a possibility, and I don't want to take the chance of missing it. He's obviously in your lineup. Now, for the Steelers, we know there's no Benny Snell. Trey Edmonds looked good at times last week, but he left the game with an injury. There's a chance that James Conner is out once again this week. We may only be left with Jalen Samuels, and if that's the case, he becomes a must-start just based off of volume alone. Last week, he didn't put up huge volume numbers, but he had 13 receptions for an 83 total yards. And if you're in a PPR format, that is absolute gold. I'll take that every single week. Now, if James Conner does play, he gets a full practice in by the end of the week, and they know he's going to go here this weekend, then Jalen Samuels kind of takes a backseat, flex play at best in deeper leagues. So it really all depends. As of right now, though, sounds like Conner will not play, and if that's the case, we're firing up Jalen Samuels once again. Panthers and Packers up now, and this is the point of the show where I question whether or not you should be playing fantasy football if you're looking to me to tell you whether you should start Christian McCaffrey or not. If you have him, you start him, and you're happy about it this week because right now, the Packers give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing running backs. Great start for Christian McCaffrey. For Green Bay, that entire offense was horrible in Week 9. Combined last week, Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones had 78 total yards. However, Williams had the better day because he found the end zone and got that touchdown. Carolina, though, has been getting torched on the ground for weeks now. They're giving up over 24 fantasy points per game, the 5th most in the NFL. Now, both of these Green Bay backs on a weekly basis are flex plays, at worst. Aaron Jones has that running back one upside. Obviously, we've seen that every single week. However, there are weeks like last week where there may not be enough to go around to supply both of them with solid fantasy days. Aaron Jones still has that higher ceiling, but maybe Jamal Williams has that safer floor. I mean, I highly doubt you have better options going into the weekend, and both of these guys would be in my lineup in a great matchup going up against Carolina, looking for one of those big days for Aaron Jones to make up for the lackluster performance that we saw last week in Week 9. Vikings and Cowboys, and I don't know if I have to say a whole lot about this one. I mean, it may be one of the easiest start-sit sections to an episode ever. If you have Dalvin Cook, you start Dalvin Cook. If you have Ezekiel Elliott, he's coming on strong here lately. You're starting Ezekiel Elliott. They're both matchup proof. It doesn't matter who they're playing. They're fixtures in your starting lineup. Alexander Mattison, somebody who I liked last week, came out and just did not get the volume. Wherever Amir Abdullah came from, I thought it was like 2015 all over again. Didn't know what was going on. But until they can give him more consistent touches, Alexander Mattison back in the sit column. Seahawks and Niners Monday Night Football could be one of the best Monday Night Football games we've seen here in a while. I mean, last week Chris Carson proved that he's somewhat matchup proof, going up against a very difficult run defense of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and still putting up solid numbers. And the passing game for the Seahawks right now is really opening up running lanes for Chris Carson on a weekly basis. We know the volume is going to be there. We know the goal line touchdown upside is going to be there. And now they add Josh Gordon into the mix. That only stretches the field even more. This San Francisco defense is legit. They're one of the best defenses in all of football. Last week, Kenyon Drake kind of dismantled this defense, though, and there's no way that I could sit Chris Carson going into a week like this against a very difficult defense. With all of these bye weeks, there's not going to be better options out there. Volume can cure things at times. Sometimes it may hide some inefficiencies, and he's getting the volume. You're still starting Chris Carson. For San Francisco, it's another one of those headaches. You know, Matt Breida, limited with injuries, comes out, outperforms Tevin Coleman last week, even though he was injured coming into the game. You just don't know what to expect from this backfield. Going forward, I don't trust these guys as anything more than a flex play at best. Now, obviously, up until before last week, Tevin Coleman was the safer option, but now it looks like, after just 1 week, Matt Breida may be more, relied upon in the running game. It's really going to be who has the hot hand on a weekly basis, and it's going to be impossible to figure out beforehand. Both of these guys have that huge upside, and that's why they're staying in the flex column and nothing more going forward. All right, those are all my starts and sits here. Week 10 fantasy football for the running back position. Let me know what you think down below. Greatly appreciate the support there. Remember, we're not always going to agree, and we're not going to be 100%. We know that going in. Nobody's going to be perfect. Take some of this perspective. Apply it to your team, to your league. We're trying to make those decisions that you have on a weekly basis a little bit easier. We're not sitting here and trying to tell you what to do. There's so much that goes into all these different teams and leagues. There's no channel. No one out there could legitimately tell you what to do on a weekly basis. There's too many variables. Take the information, use it for what it's worth, and help make those decisions on Sundays. That's what it's all about here at the Fantasy Headliners. We greatly appreciate the support here. Leave a comment down below. Do me a favor, hit that like button. If you're new, consider subscribing to the channel. We're making our push for 80,000 subscribers, and we're right around the corner. Greatly appreciate the support out there. Everybody have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you later.